Well, welcome to this edition of the 700 Club. A turn for the worst, Hurricane Dorian intensifying overnight to a Cat 3. High anxiety as the killer storm climbs up the U.S. coastline. Will North Carolina bear the brunt of an eye-wall hit? Plus, apocalyptic destruction in the Bahamas. Here's Amber Strong with more.
In the U.S., Hurricane Dorian is gaining strength. It's now a Category 3 storm with heavy rains and dangerous winds menacing the Carolinas. But in the Bahamas, devastation, with 20 confirmed fatalities, a number that's expected to rise. The U.S. Coast Guard is on the scene there, rescuing the stranded and injured. As the water recedes, revealing miles and miles of debris littering the landscape that was considered a paradise just days ago. Here in the U.S., Dorian began whipping parts of Charleston, South Carolina Thursday. Officials there warning residents of life-threatening storm surge.
It is the water that kills people. It is the water that is the real danger.
FEMA Response and Recovery Associate Jeff Bayard telling CBN News' Faith Nation residents need to remain vigilant.
This has been a long storm, so you can get fatigue at times to set in, and we really want our citizens to continue to monitor the impacts of Dorian.
Some locals are heeding those warnings.
Boarded up and packed, and so I'm on my way.
The storm is projected to continue up the coast and potentially make landfall in the next 24 hours.
Charleston's getting wind gusts to 60. We're liable to see some 75, 80-mile-an-hour gusts, but they're shifting into the northwest. I think Myrtle Beach is probably going to see 75 to 80, but when you get to Cape Fear, Cape Lookout, Cape Hatteras, Duck, Buxton, all those places, we could see wind gusts over 100 miles an hour.
Florida residents are breathing a sigh of relief as Dorian passed by, leaving minimal damage.
We expected it to be a Category 4 hurricane, and then it bumped up to a 5. And luckily it wasn't as bad for the east coast of Florida like we thought it was going to be.
But in the Bahamas, a drastically different story, with tens of thousands at risk due to lack of medical care, clean water, and food. Relief groups are scrambling to get aid to the islands. It's where we find CBN News' Chuck Holton, who flew into the Bahamas to see the devastation and bring much-needed relief.
Rough seas give way to a sunny day here in the Bahamas, but for the residents here, their nightmare is just beginning.
We just finished flying over some of the barrier keys and Abacos. And I can say I don't think there's one tree on any of these islands that survived. There surprisingly are a few houses that appear to be untouched, but the rest of these houses are almost a total loss. And even the ones that did survive most likely are not going to be inhabitable because all of the infrastructure on those islands are gone.
Relief groups are moving quickly to avoid a humanitarian disaster. CBN's Operation Blessing is already on the ground in Nassau, preparing to bring in teams to provide medical care, food, clean water, and water filtration systems, as well as assess their shelter needs.
The priority right now is search and rescue, so we are in hold with all the equipment, trying to figure out the best way to get there and start helping the people. We have water equipment ready to go to desalinate the water and make it fresh so people can start having fresh water, and also some solar power equipment so people can have little electricity at least to charge their cell phones or see during the night.
This is Sandy Point on the southern edge of the Abaco Islands. It's one of the few places that aircraft can land and take off that's not underwater. So a little bit of aid that's coming in here, coming to this place, and there's already a big group of people that are waiting for it.
Americans are heeding the call for help, but from the air, it's clear that this once lush tropical paradise will now take months, if not years, to recover. From the Bahamas, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
It's devastation, ladies and gentlemen. Suffering beyond measure. We've never seen anything like it in this hemisphere before. Well, Operation Blessing is already on the ground in Nassau, the Bahamas, preparing to bring additional teams. We've got medical care, clean water, solar lights, and water filtration systems, and food. And plans are being made to send doctors into the Bahamas as we can make that available. And we, of course, need your help. And it's CBN, Operation Blessing, CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia. We know the suffering, and we want to help. And Operation Blessing is there, giving them the help they need. Well, in other news, the president is tightening the screws on Iran, but he's giving a message, and that particular message is we don't want regime change in Iran. Of course we want regime change. That bunch of mullahs are thugs. They're running that country. It's a theocracy, and they have brought terror and evil to that nation, and they are the ones that are leading the Quds force to imperil Israel and all their neighbors. To say we don't want regime change is ridiculous. Mr. President, please. John Jessup has more.
Pat, even so, the president says his Iran strategy is working. The White House unleashed new sanctions Wednesday related to Iran's oil trade. The move came after imposing new sanctions against Iran's space agency for technology, which the State Department says is identical to that used to test ballistic missiles. However, the president says his goal is not to topple Iran's leadership. He believes change will take place from within.
Iran is a country with tremendous potential. We're not looking for regime change. They have tremendous potential, and I think they're going to want to take advantage of that potential. I really believe that.
This week, Iran threatened to take further steps away from the nuclear pact it signed with Europe and the United States. And Pat, of course, President Trump withdrew from that deal last year.
Well, the Obama deal was ill-conceived, and I think he was wise to pull out of it. But Iran has several enrichment facilities. They're almost to having a nuclear bomb. They have fissionable material. Several spots in Iran have been noted that they're building fissionable material that could lead to atomic weapons. But beyond that, they're fomenting with Hezbollah and their proxies all over the Middle East. And they have been responsible for the deaths of a number of American people. And the rhetoric from their leadership is incredible. And to say we don't want a regime change, come off it. John?
Pat, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is off to a rocky start, suffering historic defeats at the hands of Parliament and members of his own Conservative Party. As Dale Hurd explains, it's all about his drive to take Britain out of the European Union on schedule.
Boris Johnson took a political whooping Wednesday after Parliament passed a bill to block a no-deal Brexit and rejected Johnson's motion for early national elections that might have given him a new Brexit majority in Parliament.
I note that the leader of the opposition, 48 hours ago, he was leading the chants of stop the coup, let the people vote. Now he's saying stop the election and stop the people from voting.
It leaves Johnson severely weakened politically. The bill blocking a no-deal Brexit must now pass the House of Lords, where some have said it could run into trouble.
There are a lot of peers, Lords, who are in favour of Brexit and who do not like this bill, and they will try to filibuster.
Pro-Brexit Lords were also said to have prepared 100 amendments to slow down the process. But if the Lords pass it, as many believe, Johnson says that would effectively end his Brexit negotiations with the European Union. What some fear is coming has been described as a train wreck. But scary stories also make useful propaganda. No one really knows what will happen.
I have never known a time when British politics has been like this. I've been working in Westminster for nearly 20 years.
We're in highly uncharted waters. Nobody knows what's going to happen next.
Those who oppose a no-deal Brexit have been warning it could cause food and drug shortages, travel delays, even new fighting in Northern Ireland. But the Bank of England now reports that the economic shock of a no-deal Brexit would be less severe because of preparations that have been made since last year. But the economy would shrink by only 5.5% instead of the 8% that had been predicted. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Pat, who knows where all this is headed?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here's the situation. The European Union is under the control of an incredible bureaucracy that is as sclerotic as any you could imagine, and they can't get anything done. and they're putting all kinds of rules and regulations on the member states. And England is saying, you are stifling our growth. We can't make it with the regulations you put in place. And our own representatives are just a small part of the European Union, and we have no authority over what you're doing. And we want to get out of it because we have a commonwealth. We have our own block of nations that we're responsible for, and we want to be free. So the people in England voted, we want out of Brexit. We want out of the European Union. We want to exit. And that's where the exit, Britain is going to exit Brexit. Okay. Now, all of a sudden, the people began to think, well, yes, we can get out, but how about making a deal before we leave? What about passports? What about trade? What about the right of our people to go freely in and out of the continent? And what about all the things that are relationships that we have with the countries like France and Germany and Sweden and so forth? Okay, so the Parliament says, okay, Boris, we don't mind getting out. We've already voted to do that, but we've got to have some regulation. We can't have a, quote, no-deal Brexit. We've got to know what the deal is, and the people have got to be in agreement. Germany and France have got to sign off on it, and they haven't done it. And Boris Johnson says, I want to get out anyhow, and the Parliament's saying, no way. And so now they've got a constitutional crisis, and Britain, which is one of the oldest democracies in the world, is looking like a banana republic, and it's not a very pleasant situation. That's the deal. John?
Pat, back here at home, turning to the internet and privacy specifically as it relates to children, Google has agreed to pay a record-high fine over alleged violations of children's privacy. The FTC and Google reached a $170 million settlement over allegations against YouTube, which is owned by Google, for collecting kids' private data without asking their parents. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, requires giving notice to parents and obtain their verifiable consent before collecting children's personal information online. Critics complain the fine is too small, pointing out that Google and YouTube's parent company, Alphabet, made more than $30 billion last year. An FTC official says the fine is historic and just about equal to the Consumer Protection Division's annual budget. Well, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer moved Wednesday to make her state the first to ban flavored electronic cigarettes, accusing companies of using candy flavors and deceptive advertising to hook children on nicotine. The state health department issued emergency rules prohibiting the sale of flavored nicotine vaping products that include sales to adults, as well as the misleading marketing of e-cigarettes. Retailers will have 30 days to comply. Federal research shows last year 1 in 5 American high school students reported vaping in the previous month. There have been more than 200 cases of vaping-related illnesses, Pat, reported this summer.
I commend Michigan for that action, but we ought to ban that whole thing. Cigarettes are not good. You know, we pay a lot of money to support the tobacco industry. They get several $100 million from the government. They get subsidies. And I have said a long time ago, and I say it again, the United States should make some provision where tobacco companies could have some kind of a moratorium against taxes in which they could pursue other avenues of profit, and they could begin to divert the cigarette money into something more useful. And after that time, they will have collected enough tax-free money that they can get on with their life. And then at that point, you cut out the subsidies and you make it an absolute crime to sell cigarettes, because it is one of the great health hazards of our nation. And now this vaping is much worse because it's leading to incredible unknown health hazards. And so, Michigan, my hat's off to you. You've done a good job.